Okay, 10 days ago we lost a big one in sports. Rickey Henderson. This is my childhood sports idol. It wasn't even close as far as my sports idol. Growing up, my first favorite baseball player was Jim Rice, who was at the very end of his career. And then for some reason I liked Dave Henderson also. And when I was trading and looking at cards in grade school with a friend of mine, I asked him, "Do you have any Dave Henderson cards?" And he went through and he said, "I don't, but I have Rickey Henderson." And he took out a Topps 1987 card of Rickey on the Yankees, and he's in full swing in the Yankee uniform. And I went, "Who is this guy?" So I looked at it, and I think I traded him a card, and I looked at the stats in the back, and I said, "Well, this guy's stats are a lot better than Dave Henderson's. I've never heard of him, but he looks really cool." So I think he'll be a favorite player of mine. This is a good guy to follow. So it went on from there. So I followed him through the rest of his career and all the way to his final game in 2003. So Rickey was born, like Jesus, he was born on December 25th in 1958 in the back of a Chevy on the way to the hospital. "I was always fast," he said. He couldn't wait to get to the hospital. Named Rickey Nelson Henley Henderson. Yes, he was named after the great singer Rickey Nelson, who in 1958, the Ozzie and Harriet show was at its peak. And so apparently his parents, or at least one of his parents, was a big fan of the show or of Rickey Nelson to give him that name. He grew up, he was born in Chicago, so he lived in Chicago till the age of 2, moved to Arkansas. I think it was Pine Bluffs, Arkansas, from the ages 2 to 7, and then from 7 on into high school. Grew up in Oakland, California. That's where the family moved. Went to high school there, and he started playing baseball on the sand lots. He was naturally left-handed, but he saw everybody else, batting from the right box at the batter's plate at the plate, and he assumed that was just the rule, that you had to bat from that side. So that's why he batted right-handed his whole career and threw left, which is just one other unorthodox thing about Rickey Henderson, because I don't think there's anybody in baseball today that bats right and throws left. You just don't see it. Great player in high school, but also a great running back. And if you look at him at any point in his career in the major leagues, standing at the plate or on base, or in the outfield, you would say this is not a Major League Baseball leadoff hitter. This is an NFL tailback. He was built just like a tailback, 5'10", muscular, poured into his uniform, and he was great in high school. USC gave him offers. This is around the time of Ricky Bell, I think, the running back there. Great running back. Oakland Raiders owner Al Davis had his eyes on him, but his mother wanted him to play baseball, so he played baseball. Drafted by the Oakland A's in 1976, and he, from there, played in the minor leagues. I think it was all on the West Coast. Boise was the first team. It's like a rookie league team. Modesto in California, single A, and then double A, Jersey City. Okay, so East Coast, that was 1979 or 1978. In 1979, made it to triple A with Ogden. In 1979, he did get the call up with the Oakland A's, and he played for them for roughly 100 games that year, 89 games that year, and really showed his stuff. He had stolen 7 bases in a game at the age of 18 with Modesto. Pretty incredible. And he had a great half season in 1979 with the Oakland A's. Stole 33 bases that year. And then in 1980, his breakout season, he had 100 stolen bases that season. He scored 111 runs and just established himself as a phenomenal player. This was the Billy Ball Oakland A's. Billy Martin, who was his favorite manager of all that he ever played with, because he kind of let him do whatever. He let him run, do whatever he wanted, and he would later be his manager in 1988 with the New York Yankees. 1981 was a strike season with the Oakland A's, and this was the year that we saw our first taste of Rickey in postseason baseball, and he played very well in that series. I think he batted like 4 something in the ALCS. The A's got to the American League Championship Series. They lost to the Yankees, but Rickey had a great season. And then I think they got swept. It was like best of 5 back then. They got swept 3-0. 1982 was known as the year that he broke Lou Brock's single season stolen base record. It was 118. Rickey got 130 that year. He actually kind of slowed down at the end of the year. He was on pace to get close to like 150, but then he kind of let up if you look at it more closely. But 1983 was another excellent year, and this was the year that Rickey hit 292 and he was unable to get the 3 years in a row of 100 stolen bases. He got 66. That feat has only been achieved by Vince Coleman 3 years in a row with 100 stolen bases. And so 1984 would be his final year with the Oakland A's. I'm not sure if Billy Martin was gone by then, but another great year. This is kind of his first year where he showed that he could hit more home runs than he usually did. He hit 16 home runs. He hit 293, 66 steals, 113 runs scored. So just an excellent season. And then it was 1985. It was on to the Bronx, and so he played with the New York Yankees from 1985 to 1989, part of 1989. Excellent season. Let me go back to 1981. He should have been the American League MVP that year. If you look at his numbers, it went to Raleigh Fingers, the closer at that time for the Brewers, and that's definitely a travesty. It should have gone to Rickey. But in 1985, he had one of his best seasons. He was in the running for the MVP again, and it went to his teammate Don Mattingly, I think rightfully so. But Rickey hit 314 that year. It was almost a career high, 319 in the strikes shortened 81 season. But 314 again showed power numbers even more this year with 24 home runs, had a ridiculous 146 runs scored, and then 80 stolen bases. So could have been MVP that year, but it went to teammate Don Mattingly, who was just in his prime at that point. 86 was a year that his power numbers increased even more, 28 home runs, but his average dropped. He was in like the 260s that year. He was swinging more for power, but again, a great stolen base year. 87 stolen bases, 130 runs scored, so a great season that year for Rickey. And then in 1987 was a lost year for him. That was the year that he was having a great year. He was batting 291, stealing bases. That was the year that his teammate Mattingly, I think, tied the record for grand slams in a season. But he popped his hamstring and was lost for the season. Still managed to swipe 41 bases in just, 94 5 games, which is incredible. But this ended up being the only year in the 1980s that he did not lead the American League in stolen bases. It went to Harold Reynolds of the Seattle Mariners. You probably know him from ESPN. But every other year in the 1980s, he won the stolen base crown in the American League. All right, 1988, he had another great season. This time he was back at full health and had a great year. I think he had like 90 steals that year or something. Looks like he had 93 stolen bases, 305. Almost like MVP numbers again. And this time 17 home runs. Always up there in runs scored. And then 140 runs in 1980. Good Lord. So that was like almost a career high. Do I have that right? No, not 140. 118. Still incredible. This was Billy Martin was manager of the Yankees then. I don't think he lasted the season. Could be wrong on that, but 1989 would be his final year with the New York Yankees. They were really starting to lose a lot of games at this point, and I always thought it was a big shame that the mid 80s to late 80s New York Yankees, it was a team that had some big names on it. They had Henderson, they had Don Mattingly, they had Dave Winfield, Willie Randolph, even third baseman Mike Pagliarulo. Pags was a low average hitter, but he had a lot of power. He ended up getting a ring with the Minnesota Twins in 1991. They just didn't really have the pitching. Randolph was the only holdover on that team from the 77, 78 back-to-back teams. Besides, well, they had Ron Guidry, but he really started to decline by, say, 1987. They would bring in a lot of sluggers also during that time, from like 85 to 80, 89. I mean, there was Mel Hall. There was power-hitting catcher Matt Noakes, who was there. Jesse Barfield, who led the league in home runs with the Blue Jays one year in 1986 with 40. And so he was there. There was, of course, Steve Balboni. They brought him in from the Royals. Ken Phelps, from the Mariners, traded for Jay Buhner. And there was even Jack Clark at the very end of his career, Jack the Ripper, who was really bad at that point. But I think even Darrell Evans of the Tigers came in for like half a season. So they had a lot of these like big bats that came in, and they had Hensley Mullins, who was a bust as a huge rookie phenom, but the pitching was just never there. By 1989, you had like Tommy John in his mid 40s was a regular in the rotation, so it was pretty bad. And it wasn't until Rickey left, it was probably Mattingly declined. If you start at the 90s, like the early 90s, it wasn't until about 1990 and 1991 they were just awful. And then by 1992 they started to get some of the pieces that would lead to those championships in the late 1990s. You had like Rivera and Pettit and Posada in the minor leagues at that point. They drafted Derek Jeter in 1992, and they added by 1993 a couple of Bernie Williams was, I think, broke in like 1991, and they added guys like Wade Boggs and Cecil Fielder maybe in 93. I know Jimmy Key in 1993. So it's just a shame that the Yankees, with all that at least offensive talent in the 1980s, were denied a shot at the at being in the postseason. So it's kind of a shame. And even though it's his team, Rickey's team was the A's. Like, he's in the Hall of Fame as an A. He's just identified as an Oakland A. I got to say, he looked awesome in that Yankee uniform. I thought that he looked great in the pinstripes. Had the Jerry curls working. and had a great time. Had excellent numbers during his time with the New York Yankees. But at the trade deadline, 1989, he was having an excellent season with the Yankees when the trade came. He was up there with hitting like 294, despite the rest of the team not doing well. And I think he had like 60 stolen bases or something at the trade deadline. And they traded, so the trade came with the Oakland A's to go back to Oakland, who had lost the World Series in 1988. They were trying to find that missing piece to put them over the hump and get that championship, and they got it with Rickey Henderson to bring him back as a leadoff hitter. Like before that, it was like Tony Phillips, who was a good role player, a good second baseman. But boy, that team, adding him, just clinched a World Series title for them, and he was awesome from the get-go in his first game there, and then played incredibly down the stretch as they got closer to the postseason. Was a huge catalyst in getting them to the ALCS, and when he got there, it was against the Blue Jays. It was one of the greatest performances in league championship series history. Rickey batted like 474, had a couple of bombs, set a record for stolen bases in the league championship play. He had the Toronto Blue Jays, who they beat I think 4-1 in that series, absolutely befuddled. Catcher Ernie Witt just had a look of he couldn't do anything against Rickey stealing bases. He put on a show in that ALCS, was the MVP, and then there was the 1989 World Series, the Bay Area, the Earthquake World Series against the San Francisco Giants, where before Game 3, of course, there was the big earthquake, and when people ask, where were you, he never liked having that question asked to him, because when the earthquake happened, he was on the John back in the clubhouse. And Rickey was phenomenal in that World Series. In Game 4, I think, off of Don Robinson or Rick Russell, he hit a leadoff home run to put them over the top. He had a lot of stolen bases. Should have been the MVP in that World Series. It went to Dave Stewart, who was his childhood friend, so he was cool with that, but he said he probably should have been the most valuable player, and I think he should have been. And in 1990, they went for a back-to-back, and Rickey had his best season of all time. He won his first league MVP in 1990. He hit 325. He hit, I think, 28 home runs, matching his career high. He had 65 stolen bases, leading the league. Easily won the MVP. Was in contention for the batting title, but coming down to the end, George Brett was in the lead, and he sat his last game, and Rickey was just below him, and he played his last game, and Rickey kind of held this against Brett, saying, he should have played. And for all of Brett's postseason heroics and crab leg eating heroics, I agree with that. Brett shouldn't have chickened out. He should have played and earned the batting title. So that kind of hurt Rickey getting what would have been his one batting title in the American League. But as it was, it secured Brett's batting title and making him the only player in Major League history to win batting titles in 3 different decades: 1976, 1980, and 1990. And winning, and the A's that year were loaded. I mean, that pitching staff, like from 1989, was pretty much the same staff. It was even better. Mike Moore, Dave Stewart, Bob Welch, not the Fleetwood Mac guy, Storm Davis, I believe, was still there. I know he was there in 1989, but just an incredible, and then an incredible rotation, incredible bullpen with Rick Honeycutt, Dennis Eckersley. And at the trade deadline, they were already loaded. He also, I think, maybe Willie Randolph, was on the 1990 A's too. So he was reunited with Willie Randolph. At the trade deadline, the A's just got richer. They picked up 2 veteran, borderline Hall of Fame hitters, excellent hitters. One was Harold Baines, the great hitter, almost 3,000 hits with the White Sox, Rangers, Orioles. And the other was the great Willie McGee from the St. Louis Cardinals. Came on board, and McGee won the batting title that year with his .335 average frozen in the National League. No one was able to to beat it, to pass it after he was traded to the late in the year to the A's. Despite all that talent, they went and swept the Red Sox easily. Roger Clemens ejected in a roid rage in Game 4, and on their way to the World Series against a team with much less talent, the Cincinnati Reds, but with much more grit. Rickey had a great series in against the Red Sox and against the Reds in 1990. Jose Canseco and others did not. I think Jose batted like .093 in the World Series. One of the biggest gag jobs in Major League history, going for the back-to-back, and they lost that World Series in a sweep to the Cincinnati Reds. This would have, if they had won that would have been, Tony La Russa would have had 4 World Series championships and would have had championships in 4 different decades. So a huge disappointment for that team to go to 3 straight World Series, 88, 89, 1990, and only come out with 1. They were heavy favorites against the Dodgers in 88. Rickey, of course, not a part of that team. And they were heavy favorites in 1990 against the Reds and blew it. This was a completely different team than the 81 playoff team that Rickey was on. That was like Dwayne Murphy and maybe like Dave Kingman. So I don't think there were any holdovers from that early 80s team that were in the late 80s Bash Brothers. Oakland Athletics. 1991, most of the team still intact. I think 1990 was the year that Rickey eclipsed Ty Cobb's American League career stolen base record. And then in 1991 would be the year in May where he would break the all-time record, Lou Brock's record. And it's just incredible because he was only 32 years old when he broke that record. That's something you did break when you're like, compiling at the end of your career. Just incredible. And that was just a down year for him. He got the big contract and didn't hit as well. His average dropped. Had some good power numbers. And the A's also faltered. Didn't even make the postseason. The Twins won the West that year and won the World Series. No one saw that coming. And then 1992 was a kind of a weird year. Rickey had a better year this time. He batted .283. He led the league with a lot of stolen bases, a lot of stolen bases. 53, I believe. No, 48. Okay, so 48 still led the league. 1992, and they won the West again. The A's won the West. This was, by the way, Tony La Russa's finest managerial job with the Oakland Athletics. They did not have the same talent that they had in the late 80s and in 1990. So some of the players were aging. I think that the pitching wasn't as good that year. Jose Canseco left for the Rangers that year. I think that was the year that he had the home run, the ball bounced off his head for a home run. They were winning with players like Jerry Brown in the starting lineup and Scott Blankenship and Scott Brocious and kind of a patched together pitching staff, but made it to the ALCS. I think they lost 4-2 to the Toronto Blue Jays. Rickey again played well in that ALCS. I think it was Game 5 in Oakland where Alomar hit a top of the ninth go-ahead home run off Dennis Eckersley. I do remember watching that, and I hated Alomar for that home run, for putting him up like I think 3-2, and they won it back in Toronto. And I was rooting against them so hard against the Braves, and against the Braves in that 1992 World Series. But the Braves, the Blue Jays pulled out in 6 games with none other than Mr. May, Dave Winfield, now 41, he had batted like .090 for the Yankees back in the 1981 World Series, shows up in 1992 and hits a go-ahead RBI double in the top of the 10th inning, I believe, at Fulton County Stadium in Game 6 to give them the World Series victory. I think it was that Reardon who gave that up? Or was that the guy for the Royals guy, Leibrandt? It may have been Leibrandt again, who lost it in 91. The Blue Jays won that World Series. 1993 was an excellent year for Henderson for a lot of reasons. So he was, again, by the trade deadline, he was in contention for the batting title that season. He was hitting at the time of the trade deadline. He was hitting .319. He had 66 steals, and then the trade came in the end of July with the Toronto Blue Jays, who were going for back-to-back. They were already loaded. They had already added Paul Molitor and Dave Stewart in the offseason. They traded for Rickey. I think Darnell Coles was one of the players involved in that trade that went to Oakland. Rickey, now 34, but still playing some of his best baseball, went to Toronto. Didn't play that well for those couple of months during August and September. He didn't bat very well for them. Didn't do that great in the ALCS against the White Sox. Hit fairly well. Had some good games against the Phillies in the World Series. And then it was the Game 6, the Joe Carter game. Who else led off the top of the bottom of the ninth inning in that game with the Phillies leading? But Rickey came up, drew a walk off Mitch Williams. Rickey drawing a walk was more exciting than most players hitting a home run, because he had this thing where on ball 4 he had this particular kind of bat drop and then a slow, serious strut, his first couple of steps towards first base, as if to tell the pitcher, now look what you've done. And after that walk, Mitch Williams was rattled when Henderson was on first and when he was on second. He was using the slide step because he was so intimidated by Rickey being on the base, and that's something that Joe Carter said helped him hit that home run, the second walk-off home run in World Series history. Rickey scored on that 3-run homer, and he got his second World Series ring that year as a member of the Toronto Blue Jays. Turned out he was a rent-a player. He went back to the A's in 1994 for his third tenure. In 1994 was a strange year. It was the strike year. Rickey was okay that year. Of course, the strike ended the season. He batted did a little better than I thought he did. So he batted in 1994. So he did not bat very well that year. 260, missed some games, only got 22 stolen bases. The A's were not good in 1994. They were pretty much being dismantled of all that talent by that point. They did finish one game behind the Rangers, but they were the Rangers were a sub 500 team that year when at the time of the strike that ended the season. So it was a bad year. And 1995 was not any better for the Oakland A's. This would be Tony La Russa's last year as a manager of Oakland. Rickey still, managed to in 1995. He hit 300 that year, and he was able to swipe 32 bases that year. Kind of looked like he was maybe starting to decline on stolen bases there, but that would change. In 1996, he went to a playoff contender. So he went to play for his first National League team in his career. This was the San Diego Padres that had a good season, and Rickey played well, and they won the division. He played well in the NLDS, but they lost, and that was a good year for him. He, except for batting average, his average dipped pretty significantly in 1996, and that was one thing that always disappointed me because most of his career he was a 290 hitter, but as he got into his later years, his average would decline. His on base percentage was still great, but his average kind of went down, and it dipped his career average to his final average was 279. I always hated that because it just doesn't really look good on the final tally, and it ends up, he has the second lowest average among 3,000 hits players in the 3,000 hits club. The lowest is Cal Ripken at 276. Rickey is the second lowest at 279. 1997, he again with the San Diego Padres, and that season, I think the Padres did not make the playoffs that year. Rickey batted like 275, not too bad, 22 steals. At the trade deadline, he went to, this was one of the strangest stops in his career, he went to the Anaheim Angels. I think they had just been called, they just changed it to Anaheim Angels. They had a weird hat that year, and he batted sub 200 in his time with the Angels, who were trying to win the NL West. They failed to do so. So that was a strange stop for him. He didn't play well at all with the Angels. It was sticking in California. But 1998 would be his fourth and final tenure with the Oakland Athletics, and this was a year where Rickey, at the age of 39, led the American League in stolen bases. Just an incredible feat. He led the American League in stolen bases at the age of 39. The A's were not very good that year, but that would be his last year with the Athletics. And then in 1999, he went to the New York Mets, and then back to the National League. And this was a year where he passed Willie Mays with career runs. Batted .315, stole 37 bases at the age of 40. Had a very good year for the New York Mets. That they made the postseason, played against the Braves and the NLCS, which the Braves won. Rickey and Bobby Bowe were playing cards in the clubhouse at the time that the Braves clinched. And then in 2000, he played with the Mets again. He came back with the Mets, and then he was traded to the Seattle Mariners, where he was reunited with Lou Piniella, who was his manager with the Yankees back in '86 and '87. Got to the NLCS, played well. To the ALCS against the Yankees, played well, but the Mariners, a stacked team there, lost to the New York Yankees. And then in 2001, it was back to the Padres. This was the year that he got the I think it was the year he got the 3,000 hits, and then he also broke Ty Cobb's runs record, sliding into home plate on a home run when he broke the home run the runs record. So Rickey Henderson has scored more points, more runs than any player in Major League history. 2002 was a strange stop for him. He played with the Red Sox, and with the Boston Red Sox, batted .224 that year, only stole like 8 bases. He just missed being part of that Red Sox 2003-2004 ALCS World Series team, but in 2002 they had a ton of talent on those teams. There was still Nomar and the boys. In 19 and Manny, 19 and Pedro. 2003 would be his final year in the major leagues, back to California, this time with the LA Dodgers. And this was a year where he only played like 30 games. I thought it was less than that. Stole like 3 bases and hit a couple of home runs. He was unable to get to the 300 home runs. He finished with 297 for his career for home runs, unfortunately, and ended up 279. Went on to play with like the Newark Bears, I think, independent league in 2004, maybe 2005. Then there was like the Long Island Ducks, I think, in 2006. Played with them, or 2005. And then I think before it was 2006, maybe was the year that he was a New York Mets batting coach. And 2007, before the season, he was even talking about playing again with some team, hoping someone would. He was pushing 50, but this was the same time that, Julio Franco was playing in the leagues at the age of like 48, 49. Turns out he was born the same year as Rickey, 1958. For years we thought he was born in 1961. He wasn't. He was born in 1958. So Rickey called it quits. Didn't do much in baseball after that. Threw out the first pitch, the last Oakland game back in October, and then passed away on December 20th of this year. And gosh, just a one-of-a-kind player. He was almost like Dion before Dion, and he broke a lot of the norms as far as the kind of the rigid expectations of how baseball players kind of behave on the field, but kind of the trots and the occasionally showing up pitchers, the flair. I mean, just seemed like after every stolen base, he would get up and there'd be a button popped off. The little voodoo thing he would do with his bat when he came up to the plate, and dragging his feet and kind of batting his feet with the bat, and like some of the little just his theatrics, his snatch catch in the outfield. He was not a very good outfielder. So he had a lot of the tools. He had power, he had speed, and the base running, hitting for average. But he wasn't a very good. He didn't have a very strong arm. He could make catches in the outfield, but he would do the catch where the ball would come down and he'd like grab it like that. And I would try to copy it when I was playing in Little League and do that, and got chewed out by the coach. And just a one-of-a-kind major leaguer, Hall of Famer, most runs scored, most leadoff home runs, most stolen bases, MVP, should have had 2 MVPs, ALCS MVP. Great teammate. Nobody ever said he was a bad teammate. Everyone loved playing with him. And he'll just, be remembered for all these things and some of the funny quotes he had and Paul Bunyan-like stories. There's so many of those stories. Everybody had a great time, like, playing with him, and everyone who played with him has a great story about him. So rest in peace to the greatest leadoff hitter in Major League Baseball history, Rickey Nelson Henderson, 1958 through 2024. He'll be sorely missed. All right, guys. Thanks for watching. Peace.